If you believe that all human vices spring from two sources, idleness and superstition, and that there are but two virtues, energy and intelligence, then you should read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And one question before we get to the review: did I enjoy this read? And the answer is yes. Welcome to Whiskey and Literature. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm reading and reviewing 52 books in 52 weeks in 2023, including the 50 greatest books of all time as determined by an algorithm. This is my 44th book review of the year so far, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And before we get to the book, let's talk briefly about Mr. Tolstoy. Count Leo Tolstoy, born in 1828, he died in 1910. Russian author, widely considered one of the greatest authors of world literature of any time. He was nominated for multiple Nobel Prizes in Literature and the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm reading two of his books this year, Anna Karenina and The Mighty War and Peace. Okay, let's talk about the specs and stats of War and Peace. The first draft of this novel was completed in 1963, but Tolstoy was unhappy with that version and heavily rewrote the entire novel between 1866 and 1869. I purchased this copy at the Goodwill bookstore in Sarasota for $3, and this is the Constant Garnett translation. Is 1,136 pages long, and that does include not one, but two epilogues. I did listen to a portion of this on Audible, which is also the Mrs. Garnett translation. It was read by Frederick Davidson for 61 hours and 6 minutes. This is the longest book that I'm reading this year, and it joins perhaps 10 to 15 books that I've read in my entire lifetime that are over 1,000 pages long. Okay, let's go through the style of War and Peace real quick. And I agree with the author, Mr. Tolstoy, that this is neither a novel, it's certainly not a poem, and it's not a philosophical text. I would classify this as a historical fiction with a dash of philosophy. It is also a critique on historical accounts in general and historians specifically. This reads just about as real as a novel can get, Tolstoy using his own accounts and times in the army to really flesh out and detail the conditions in the Russian army. Themes? Okay, so themes of War and Peace, really? It's 1,136 pages long. It covers such a wide range of themes. Let's go with patriotism, war, heroism, women's rights, religion, marriage, for duty or for love. I mean, it's just too comprehensive. We could list hugely amounts of themes here. This goes through a whole array of different thoughts as we're reading this book. Okay, I usually go through a character list, but there are over 160 actual people named in this historical fiction, and it's just too huge of a list to go through. We're just going to go through a couple in the plot. This novel spans about 15 years worth of time, starting in 1805 with Russia ruled by the Tsar Alexander I during the Napoleonic Wars. 5 aristocratic families, they have their plots and their stories interwoven to make up the bulk of the plot. And understandably, this review would be just way too long if we even skim the surface of the entire novel. We begin and we end the book with Pierre. He is the illegitimate son of Count Bezúkhov, whose only job in the novel is to die and leave his name and his fortune to Pierre, and cutting out most of his other family members in the will. So Pierre, he goes almost instantly from awkward bastard to eligible bachelor. He allows himself to be almost forcibly married to Elena, who essentially he pays to leave him alone. He lives a dissipated, unfulfilled life until he finds meaning in Freemasonry. The wars of the 3rd through 5th coalitions, 1803 through 1809, happen in the background of the novel until Napoleon decides to make peace with Alexander, until he decides to invade again Russia in 1812. Pierre, he feels patriotism and it's his duty, and so he levies some troops and off to war he goes. He is fascinated by war, has some misadventures until he ends up in French-occupied Moscow, planning to assassinate Napoleon. He is captured by the French and assumed to be an incendiary, someone who's engaged in burning down Moscow. He almost faced the firing squad. He's force-marched all over Russia, suffering deprivations until the French head west with their tail between their legs, and he's rescued by his Russian comrades. During the war, Pierre's wife, his best friend, the younger brother of his future bride, they all die, along with probably another 500,000 Russians. You could do a 10-part review of this novel and still not get through the entire thing, so that's all we're going to talk about, the plot, and let's get to my thoughts of War and Peace. I have read Anna Karenina this year and War and Peace, and you can't help but compare the two books. War and Peace is a much more difficult read beyond just the obvious size difference. Through the first half of War and Peace, I really did think that Anna Karenina was the superior work. But I really appreciated or enjoyed the second half of War and Peace, and now I do consider it to be the greater. And Tolstoy, his genius, I think, is in individual anecdotes that flesh out the greater story. For example, the wolf hunt. And I've read some people who really just can't stand that entire scene, but I really appreciated it. Two of my favorites are Natasha's debut, and a few days later, when she, after the soiree, when she declares her love for Anatoly to Sonia. I was laughing so hard at his depiction of a teenage girl nervous about appearing in public for the first time and getting ready for the party. And that even better scene is when she declares her certainty that nobody has ever loved like she and Anatoly love each other. And after only 3 days. Sonia, she doesn't understand. Such a teenager, that was awesome. Petya, he is Natasha's younger brother and he goes to war. I think he was 16 or 17. And he has a Cossack sharpen his sword. And it's all a dream, a game to him. Until a bullet in his brain ends all of that. That was a fantastic sequence. So, what is War and Peace? On the surface, it's a fantastic, detailed historical narrative of Russian history. If we go down one level, Tolstoy, he strives to answer the question, why do things happen? There's a great anecdote, part 9, chapter 1, it's page 566 in my book. I'm going to read this to you. I got a couple things I want to read in here to you. When the apple is ripe and falls, why does it fall? Is it because it is drawn by gravitation to the earth? Because its stalks withered? Because it is dried by the sun? Because it grows heavier? Because the wind shakes it? Or because the boy standing under the tree wants to eat it? Not one of those is the cause. All that simply makes up the conjunction of conditions under which every living, organic, elemental event takes place. So why did the French do French things? Why did the Russian army act the way it is? Why did Pierre get married? Why did the individual soldiers act? And I think Tolstoy did a great job trying to answer these questions, or if nothing else, making us think about it. And yes, I went out and I bought some Russian vodka for this book review. I'm not going to go into any really review about it. I just, perhaps I shouldn't be buying Russian stuff during the Russian-Ukraine conflict, but they talk about vodka quite a bit in the book, so I thought it'd be pretty cool to have a nice pour of it while I was talking about the book. So, did Pierre learn anything? So I want to read 2 pages, or two just very brief accounts here. Some realizations that Pierre had as he was forced march with the French. And I think when I read these accounts, I think a great book makes you think, how would you react in this situation? It's the Russian wintertime. You're being forced marched, eating horse flesh if you're lucky, no shoes, no fur-lined coat, no cap. I mean, how long would you make it? How content would you be in your life? And this is Pierre, and he lived this dissipated life through all these years, and he ends up in this situation. And let's see what he thought. So this is something that Pierre is talking to himself as he is marching as a prisoner. He had learned that just as there is no position in the world in which a man can be happy and perfectly free, so too there is no position in which he needs be unhappy and in bondage. There is an old saying that I, as a teenager, and I'm going to butcher it here, so apologies for that. I didn't actually write that down. It just came to me. But it goes something like, between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. This is something that I don't actually practice in my daily life, though I think about it sometimes. And it just means that because things happen to you, you still determine how you act, or you allow it to affect you and your disposition on a daily basis. And I thought that's really what I think a great novel does, is it makes you think. And here's just another, this is my last one here, I'm going to read to you. There are so many things in here that I marked up, and as I was reading War and Peace, and I thought, wow, what a good thought. It really made me stop and ponder. And I would love to read this book again sometime in the future. I do know that Tolstoy wrote some other books, and I think I would like to read some more of Tolstoy. And I have read some thoughts about the translations, and I enjoy the Constance Garnett translation. There are some people who say, and she actually knew Tolstoy personally. There are some people who say that there are a couple translations that are more true to Tolstoy's voice and his thoughts, and maybe I'll give those a go at some point. Have you ever read a War and Peace translation other than Constance Garnett? And I never really thought about translators until earlier this year, and I've read a couple of books that are translated that I really felt like they were just kind of clunky. Not quite like they just ran it through Google Translate, but almost. Anyway, Pierre, talking about his older self and his his former self and his new self. What had worried him in the old days, what he had always been seeking to solve, the question of the object of life, did not exist for him now. That seeking for an object in life was over for him now, and it was not fortuitously or temporarily that it was over. He felt that there was no such object, and could not be. And it was just the absence of an object that gave him the complete and joyful sense of freedom that at this time made his happiness. He was searching for the meaning of life, the object of life, and he realized that search was keeping him from being happy and free. And now that he realized there's no real object, you live your life as best you can and be the best person that you can. And that freedom gives you the freedom to be happy and be fulfilled. Kind of, right? I mean, what a book, what a book. My overarching thought on War and Peace is, of all the books I have read this year, and I have 5 books left to read through the end of the year, so 48 books I've read, and this is one of the greatest books, certainly, that I've ever read in my entire life. And it is huge and daunting, and if you dare to put it on your shelf, I think you should. Okay guys, time for the star rating, and I judge all my books on 5 criteria, 6 if I listen to it on Audible. If you have any comments or suggestions or just thoughts, feel free to drop them in the section below. Initial response, how do I feel as soon as I finish the book? Got a 4. Recommendation, how likely am I to recommend the book? Also a 4. Style, did I enjoy the writing style? 5. Plot structure, how engaged was I in the plot and the story? 5. Characters, were they relatable, believable, engaging? 5, of course. Audible, for those books I listened to, how was the production? And Mr. Davidson, he did. At first I was like, oh my, I can't listen to any of this, but I really enjoyed his Audible production of the book. And I did read quite a bit of this book, but I did listen to him as I was commuting back and forth to work. And what a nice job. So he gets a 5. And that's 28. And 28 divided by 6 is 4.67. So 4.67 stars for War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And I think that's a nice appropriate star rating for this book. Alright guys, thanks for sticking with me. If you enjoyed the video, like it, it's free. Subscribe to see more of my content. I am doing 52 book reviews this year, and the links to those will be in this description below. I do whiskey reviews as well, which I know is confusing for quite a few people, including YouTube and myself. But for now, I thank you for being with me. I hope you're reading something good and drinking something great, my friends. Turn the pages and stay thirsty. Cheers. Tolstoy.